gonna say what I think a lot of people experienced, and that's that 2019 was pretty crazy. Some of the best moments of my life came from that year. I gave birth to my second daughter, started a business, and grew more than I can even calculate as a mother and a wife and as a friend. But 2019 really tested me, and my family for that matter. It's hard to even really list it, but 2019 was rough. We dealt with the struggle of learning what it means to be business owners. In the spring, when I was 9 months pregnant, a tree fell through our roof, and my husband had to deal with the entire fallout of that by himself. Along with that, we had to pack up our whole house that we loved and move across the country for work. My youngest daughter was a week old during that move, and on the ride here we found out that my oldest had chickenpox. A month after getting here, we lost one of our very best friends. And then for the following probably 5 months, I went through postpartum depression. That's hard to say out loud, honestly, because as a mother, to say I struggled, it makes you feel like a failure. And I think the hardest part for me admitting it was that if I said I'm struggling, then others would worry for me and for my kids. But the truth is, saying it out loud was one of the most important things that I could do. Eventually, I got out of it. Eventually, I started finding myself again, and I realized that what felt very permanent at the time was not. I realized that by saying I'm struggling, I'm not saying that I have failed. I'm not saying I'm a bad mother, and I'm not saying that I've dropped this imaginary ball that I'm supposed to continually hold. All of this seems probably very off subject for a cooking video, but the truth is it's really important. I learned 2 very important things last year. The first of which is that it'll buff out. I've said that my whole adult life, and I meant it, don't get me wrong, but I wasn't tested on it until last year. It may suck right now. What you're dealing with may seem so impossibly hard for you to handle, but you can. It'll all buff out. It may not buff out the same, and it may not buff out beautifully, but it will. Whatever you're going through now will buff out. The second thing that I realized is that sometimes you just need a cookie. And that cookie might be many things. It might be something that just makes you feel good, you know, like really, really good pasta, or a piece of bread covered in butter, or maybe for you that cookie is a hug or your best friend saying you can do this. With that said, the recipe that I'm teaching you today is an imaginary hug. It's my way of reaching through this video and saying it's gonna buff out and you're stronger than you think. And I may not be able to hug you in person, and I may not be able to tell you to your face, but if you eat this cookie, you'll know someone out there has faith in you and someone believes in you. If you're ready, let's get baking. Today we are making brown butter toffee cookies. They're one of my absolute favorite, and they're a little unique. Most of the cookie recipes that I'd learned about growing up called for the butter to be room temperature and then creamed. However, this recipe calls for something quite the opposite. It calls for melted butter. We will begin by placing 2 sticks or 1 cup of unsalted butter in a saucepan. This looks just unrealistically small, but it'll work. What this does for a cookie is it adds a nutty flavor, and it's also going to cause the cookie to spread out. Normally when you cream butter with sugar, what you're doing is adding loft to your cookies, but what we want is the opposite. Now when browning butter, you may have the urge to crank the temperature up to high and just get it over with, but that is not what browning butter calls for. You want to cook it on low, stirring. And the reason why is butter is a tricky beast. When browning butter, it's gonna seem like nothing's happening. It's gonna seem like it's just melting. But the truth is a lot's happening. And all at once, it will go from looking like it's doing nothing to burnt. The butter is starting to bubble and this white foam is starting to form on the top. That means that we're getting there. Also, if you were here, you could smell the egg that I cooked this morning burning on the inside of the burner. The white foam on the top is starting to get less and less. Also, fun fact while we wait on this to brown, a browned butter makes an incredible pasta sauce. Just throwing it out there. In fact, my friend, one of her favorite things that I ever made was a mushroom ravioli covered in a brown butter pasta sauce. You know you're getting close when the bubbles start increasing in size. We are so close, and it's so important at this stage to really keep an eye on this. Do not walk away from this butter, whatever you do, because within seconds, this is going to be browned butter. And just a couple seconds after that is burnt butter. The butter is browned. I repeat, the butter is browned. Throwing it out there, if you've got a lighter colored saucepan, that whole process is a lot easier. And also, as soon as it's finished, put it in a bowl so it can start to cool. We're gonna let it sit for at least 30 minutes until it's cooled off because we're gonna be adding this to an eggy dough. And unlike a leggy blonde, nobody wants that. Welcome back. It's been 30 minutes. Let's look at our mosaic of ingredients. We have 2 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 cup of dark brown sugar, accompanied by 2/3 cups of white sugar. We have 1 cup of browned butter, 2 teaspoons vanilla extract, 2 eggs, a cup of toffee chocolate crumbles or Heath crumbles, and lastly we have 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and lastly, a teaspoon of cornstarch. I know that sounds weird, but it's not. By adding cornstarch to our dough, what we're doing is helping that melted butter. Melted butter's great, but the issue with it in cookies is that it makes your cookies sharp, a little intense, sort of like a lace cookie. When you add cornstarch to that, what you're saying is, you can give me all that nutty flavor, however, you still get to be soft and squishy. What the cornstarch is saying to the melted butter is, please don't shut me out. Please don't slam the door. You don't have to keep your distance anymore. 'Cause for the first time in forever, we're adding cornstarch to the dough. For the first time in forever, we get buttery and soft dough. We've been watching a lot of Frozen over here. To your flour, let's go ahead and add our 1 teaspoon cornstarch, baking powder, and baking soda. In your separate bowl with the 1 cup of brown sugar and 2/3 cups of white sugar, we are going to add that cup of browned butter, making sure to retrieve all those little brown bits in the bottom. Because guys, that's where the flavor is, okay? Once that has been incorporated, we are going to add 1 egg at a time, mixing thoroughly between each addition. Add the second egg. Pour in your 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Resist the overwhelming urge to eat that. It's really tough. Begin adding your wet ingredients into your dry. I like to do it in about a half. To fold in the wet into the dry. Transfer over the remaining wet ingredients. Once your dough has come together, it's time to add the chunky little bits of love, aka the Heath. Per usual, I like to switch over to my hand at this part. It's just easier, guys. It's just easier. Of course, if I did use the spatula, I'd probably burn more calories, but again, this is a hug that you're receiving, not a calorie count. I'm not eating dough, you're eating dough. Once you've arrived at this point, if you have a melon bowler, which is basically like a small ice cream scoop, use that because then they'll all be perfectly portioned. I didn't feel like getting out the scale and weighing all of them, so I'm just using a tablespoon, and I'm gathering up enough dough to cover the surface of this spoon, and then squeezing it into my hand and rolling it into a ball, and placing it on a parchment lined baking sheet. We've got 12 cookie dough balls here, and we're going to place those inside of a 350-degree oven for anywhere between 8 and 12 minutes, depending on how your oven bakes. So I'll show you what they're supposed to look like. It has been 12 minutes, and they are perfect. P.S. If you were paying attention, you noticed I didn't add any salt to that recipe. And the reason why is because at the very end, when they're still warm on the tray, I like to add a little bit of finishing salt to the top of the cookie. It sticks better when they're warmer, and that salt is really going to bring out the sweetness from the toffee and the chocolate. I don't even want to hear that you don't like salt on your cookie. You don't know that you don't like salt on your cookie unless you've tried salt on your cookie. And if you've tried salt on your cookie and you still don't like it, then fine, send me a message about it. Plus, this is my hug, remember? Look at this cookie. Last little food for thought while we're having cookies together. If you're struggling with anything, speak up. Tell someone. Because I promise you, they will not think that you're weak. And telling people when you need help is what makes you strong. Also, someone's gonna need to take these away from me because these are dangerous. Whether you're motivated by a hug or you just want to share a cookie, get baking, y'all.